Okay, guys, welcome to the second Remembrance Day ceremony here at Artie Parker. We learned a little bit from the first one, and we're going to make sure we finish before the bell on this one. So I'm just going to start with a land acknowledgement and a welcome. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we would like to acknowledge that we are signatories of Treaty 5 land and recognize the Anishinaabe Cree Nation on whose traditional territory we live, learn, and teach. The school district of Mystery Lake is located in the community of Thompson in the province of Manitoba, which is located on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Nahitu, Innu, Dene Sluwina, Métis, Inuit, Anisinu, Anishinaabe, and Dakota Oye nations. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder of our commitment to honor treaties in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. We are all treaty people.
Good morning, staff and students. We are here today to take a moment to recognize the Canadian men and women who have, over the past century, have given their lives for the cause of freedoms. In conflicts such as Europe, Southeast Asia, and Middle East and Afghanistan. We ask you, this is a solemn occasion. A number of speakers will be coming to the front, and there will be a video footage to view. Please remain quiet, do not applaud. Please remain seated and remove your hats and remove your phones and observe respectfully. Please reflect on the advantages we have as young people in Canada. Freedoms hard won by the soldiers we pause to remember today. Joining us on the stage are two members of the Air Cadets and their training officer, Mr. Sand. Thank you for being here today. The choir will now lead us to O Canada.
Remember me. I am the one that held the line. But when the nation called, I answered. Sometimes I volunteered. Sometimes I went because I was told to go. I stood against tyranny and kept darkness from consuming the world. In order to serve, I left behind the family, friends, and freedom that so many take for granted. I gave up the warm bed, the hot meals, and the comfort of home. I went to sleep in dirt. The food I ate was now cold. I stayed up late and woke up early and trained in the mud and the rain and the misery. The crucible of training routed out my weaknesses. I became stronger. I became tougher. I became better. Much of the time, I marched to battle countless miles across whole continents with little water, less food, but plenty of pain. Sometimes I rode to battle on horseback or in wagons, sometimes on trains, later in tanks or jeeps or Humvees, and later made of steel and powered by diesel fuel or powered by the atom. I even took to the air and mastered the sky, first in planes and then in helicopters and jets.
Battalions looked to his weapon and readied himself for the fight ahead.
Some things about war evolved and changed with the times, but remember that it was always me, the warrior, that had to fight our nation's enemies. I stood my ground and sacrificed my life, my future, my hopes, my dreams. I sacrificed them all for you. Remember what I sacrificed so you can truly appreciate the incredible treasures you have. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. On that distant battlefield, in that foreign land, on some godforsaken patch of dirt amongst the fear and the fire and the bullets, or in the sky above enemy territory filled with flak, or on the unforgiving sea where we fought against the enemy and against the depths of the abyss. There I stood my ground. I did not waver and I did not hesitate. I was not just a soldier, sailor, airman. I was a son, a brother, a father. And remember them.
110 years ago, war was declared in Europe. Canada, a young nation, came to the aid of Great Britain, France, and Russia against Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. While war seemed a great adventure for the young men of all walks of life who signed up, the gruesome reality of trench warfare soon sunk in, as both sides dug in for months that dragged on into years. Canadians have a proud history of bravery serving in the cause of peace and freedom over the years. The Canadians proved themselves an exemplary soldiers, but at great costs. 65,000 soldiers lost their lives in the battles such as Ypres, the Somme, Vimy Ridge, and Passchendaele. Journals and letters home from soldiers and medical staff on the front lines have captured the grimness of the conditions. 87 years later, Canadian soldiers went into battle again in the Afghanistan War. To date, 150 Canadian Armed Forces members have died in the cause of peace and freedom in Afghanistan. An additional 59 Canadian soldiers have taken their own lives since returning home from their missions in Afghanistan due to post-traumatic stress. In 1914, 110 years ago, the Christmas truce took place. This was a series of widespread unofficial ceasefire along the Western Front of the First World War around Christmas 1914. The following year, a few units arranged ceasefire, but truces were not nearly as widespread as in 1914. This was in part due to strongly worded orders from commanders prohibiting truces. Soldiers were no longer amenable to truce by 1916. The war had become increasingly bitter after the human losses suffered during the battles of 1915.
Jenkins, Oakley, Knight.
Sleep in heavenly Ein Briter kommt! Ein Briter kommt!
Jim?
Jim, don't do it!
Halt! Er ist nicht bewaffnet! Nein, Otto!
Jim!
My name is Jim.
Mein Name ist Otto.
Pleased to meet you, Otto.
Freut mich.
Rose, she's called.
Sie ist schön. Ist schön. Danke.
Happy Christmas.
Frohe Weihnachten.
This year marks the 100th anniversary of our Air Force, the Royal Canadian Air Force. Our country has a long and proud tradition of military service in the air. The Royal Canadian Air Force, RCAF for short, was formed on April 1st, 1924, and has made many contributions over the years. More than 20,000 Canadians served with the British Air Forces during the First World War. They were some of the best fighter pilots on Europe's Western Front. Many Canadian aviators became aces by shooting down 5 or more enemy planes. Building on this success, the RCAF was created 100 years ago. It slowly grew at first, but expanded greatly during the Second World War. More than 250,000 Canadian aviators served at home and around the world in that conflict. Their efforts came at a high cost. More than 17,000 of our airmen and airwomen lost their lives. Canadian pilots also served in the Korean War. They transported troops and supplies to East Asia and flew fighter jets. During the Cold War, our warplanes served with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Forces at sea and in Western Europe, Canada continues to partner with the North American Aerospace Defense Command to protect our continent's skies today.
To fight the war in the air, Canada first needed planes. In 1939, we had only a handful of outdated aircraft. It took a year to produce the first Hawker Hurricane fighter plane, but under the leadership of aeronautical engineer Elsie McGill, the factory in Fort William, Ontario, soon began producing 4 a week. In 1940, there was only one RCAF squadron in Britain, Number 1. Its leader was Ernest McNabb of Saskatchewan, the country's most experienced fighter pilot. Number 1 Squadron took part in the first great air battle of the war, the Battle of Britain. On the night of September 15, 1940, waves of German bombers flew over London. Fighter pilots scrambled to their planes. There were more than 1,000 aircraft in the sky just south of London, McNabb recalled. I counted 9 aircraft falling at one time, and there were parachutes everywhere. The danger of collision was as great as the danger of being shot down. Winston Churchill was in a bunker below the streets of London. I asked Air Vice Marshal Park, "What other reserves have we?" he wrote. "There are none," he replied. "The odds were great, our margins small, the stakes infinite." Bombs fell, and Londoners huddled in shelters, awaiting the outcome. By the end of October, the Battle of Britain had been won. They had lost 900 aircraft, but the Germans had lost 2,300. Ernest McNabb received a Distinguished Flying Cross for his part in the battle. For the rest of the war, the skies proved to be a major battlefield, and the RCAF became a vital part of it. They bombed U-boat factories in Hamburg, escorted supply ships in the Atlantic, disrupted rail lines in Germany, fought in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Almost 94,000 Canadians served in the Royal Canadian Air Force overseas.
RCAF airmen flying in Spitfire wings have written a proud page for Canada in the winning of this greatest war.
There were 18,000 casualties. Because of the deadly nature of air battles, more than 17,000 of those gave their lives.
The gratitude of every home in our island, in our empire, and indeed throughout the world, except in the abodes of the guilty, goes out to the British airmen who, undaunted by odds, unwearied in their constant challenge and mortal danger, are turning the tide of the world war by their prowess and by their devotion. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
This year marks 10 years since Canadians served in Afghanistan. More than 40,000 Canadian Armed Force members served in Afghanistan between 2001 and 2014. It was the largest deployment of Canadian troops since the Second World War. It had the best known part of our country's mission in Afghanistan was also the most dangerous. Canadians deployed to the volatile Kandahar province in 2005. Taliban forces were very active there. Canadians faced a risk of attack every time they left their military camps to go outside to the wire. Our troops carried out many combat operations and patrol in Kandahar until 2011. Many veterans also proudly remember other kinds of Canadian contributions in Afghanistan: humanitarian efforts, infrastructure development, and nation-building projects were all important too. This included building roads, a major dam, and training the Afghan police and military. They also helped girls access schooling, something the Taliban had not allowed. Serving in Afghanistan was also very dangerous. Sadly, 158 Canadian Armed Force members died. Many more returned home with injuries. March 2024 marked the 10th anniversary of the end of Canada's mission in Afghanistan. We recognize the brave Canadians who served there. We also remember those who died defending peace and freedom.
Today, we remember D-Day 80 years later. The coast of France is serene and beautiful today. However, 80 years ago, the Canadian soldiers who stormed Juno Beach on D-Day saw a very different scene. By mid-1944, Germany had occupied much of Western Europe for 4 years during the Second World War. They heavily fortified the continent to defend the conquered territory. Mines, beach obstacles, barbed wire, heavy artillery, machine guns, and troops guarded the coast. Breaching these defenses was an enormous challenge and took years of careful preparation. On June 6, 1944, codenamed D-Day, the time for the Allied assault finally came. Canadian, British, and American forces landed in the face of heavy enemy fire along an 80-kilometer stretch of shoreline in the northwest France. A massive naval fleet and thousands of warplanes supported them. About 14,000 Canadian soldiers went ashore at Juno Beach that day. Approximately 500 Canadian paratroopers also landed further inland. 359 of our soldiers died. It was only the beginning of the tough Battle of Normandy, but the Allies had finally cracked the walls of Fortress Europe. Anne Frank recorded in her diary, she named Kitty, the events of D-Day, as she listened to her secret radio in the annex. "Dear Kitty, this is D-Day," came the announcement over the English news, and quite rightly, this is the day. "The invasion has begun. Oh, Kitty, the best of the invasion is that I have the feelings that friends are approaching." She was talking about us, Canadians, who are trying to free her and millions of others from oppression. We shall remember them.
On June 6, 1944, 6,900 ships moved across the stormy English Channel under cover of darkness. At dawn, the sound of artillery filled the air. Frank Curry, a Canadian aboard a minesweeper, described the scene. "British, American, and French cruisers and battleships opened up like the very gates of hell," he wrote. Overhead, thousands of Allied planes roared. The plan was to land 156,000 men on the beaches of Normandy, the largest invasion in seaborne history. They divided the coastline into 5 sections. The Americans landed at 2 beaches codenamed Utah and Omaha. The British were given sword and gold. And the Canadians' 10-kilometer stretch of coastline was codenamed Juno Beach. The air and naval bombardment didn't take out all the enemy positions, and the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division waded ashore under withering machine gun fire. "We had to go at least 50 yards before we got out of the sea," said Lockie Fulton of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles. "It was something to see those bullets skipping at you like stones across the water." Those who made it to shore faced mines buried in the sand. Among the first wave that landed, 1 in 2 was killed or wounded. The Regina Rifles landed in front of Coursul-sur-Mer, and were immediately pinned down by machine gun fire. Lieutenant Bill Grayson made it across the sand to the first row of houses. From there, he could see that machine gun firing in timed intervals. Between bursts, he ran to the position and threw a grenade through the gun slit. He chased the fleeing crew, and to his surprise, 35 Germans surrendered. With the gun out of action, A Company made it across the beach. On that day, there were 10,000 Allied casualties, including 1,074 Canadians. 359 Canadians gave their lives. But the invasion was a success, and it turned the tide of the war. In his diary, Prime Minister Mackenzie King wrote, "The hearts of all Canadians would be filled with silent prayer for the success of our own and Allied forces."
Canadians have served in many challenging peacekeeping operations. The United Nations (UN) mission to Rwanda from 1993 to 1996 was especially difficult. Most people in Central African country of Rwanda are from two ethnic groups, the Hutus and Tutsis. There have been tensions between them for centuries, but things got worse in the early 1990s. The risk of full-scale civil war grew. In response, the UN set up peacekeeping efforts. The UN assistance mission for Rwanda began in the fall of 1993. Canadian Armed Forces officers played an important leadership role, but even with UN peacekeepers deployed, the situation turned into a nightmare in April 1994. Hutus began to massacre hundreds and thousands of Tutsis and moderate Hutus. The peacekeepers did what they could during the widespread killing. However, they were too few in number and limited in what they could do because of their orders from the UN. They were able to save some people, but in the end, they could not prevent the worst of the horrific violence. More Canadian Armed Forces members developed to Rwanda after the genocide. They helped with humanitarian, healthcare, mine clearing, and refugee resettlement. Efforts before leaving the country in 1996. Witnessing terrible events can have a deep impact on peacekeepers. This has been one of the harshest results of the Canadian mission in Rwanda. Many of our veterans who served there develop post-traumatic stress disorder. This psychological condition can have some serious and long-lasting effects.
Of battles past and battles now and battles yet to come, They may reach the Battle of Britain, the Battle of the Atlantic, Hong Kong, Sicily, Juno Beach, the Korean War, the liberation of Holland, Cap Young. These are just some of the battles long ago that are etched in Canada's collective memory bank. Battles lost and battles won, in binding snows and blazing sun. Sadly, we now add new names to our memory bank. Kosovo, the Gulf, Kahandra. Sadder still, and there will inevitably be more future battles and more names to remember on each chilly November more. But remember them we shall, remember them we must.
Le souvenir est fondamental pour définir d'où je viens, qui je suis et où je m'en vais.
I respect Remembrance Day
because it's such an important date and such an important time.
C'est important de se souvenir.
Not just one single day, November 11.
Le 11 du 11e mois à 11 heures.
I think it's more than just saying thank you for your service.
It's also about the human side and not just the faceless soldier side.
Remembrance Day, I just think about
Passchendaele,
Omaha Beach,
Juno Beach.
Ce qu'on a fait pour les autres pays.
400,000 people took part in D-Day.
La guerre de Corée.
Hill 187.
Stabilization in Congo.
Qu'est-ce qui est arrivé en Haïti?
The children of Afghanistan.
The genocide that lasted 100 days.
For me, it's to remember the fallen.
Toutes les camarades avec qui j'ai combattu.
I remember my husband, Corporal Bryce Keller.
J'ai le capitaine Nicolas Godard dans mon cœur.
Jean-Guy, mon ami.
Caporal-chef Byron Gruff.
The families and the civilians and the people who have to deal with war in the places we've been.
I remember World War I veterans when I was growing up.
I remember Chinese Canadian in World War II.
Ces gens-là ont fait des choses qui sont extraordinaires.
They're the heroes. They gave their life.
La raison pourquoi je suis ici, la raison pourquoi je porte cet uniforme, vient de ce qui a été fait par mes prédécesseurs.
We have what we have in Canada today is thanks to our forefathers who have gone before us.
I'm not a hero, I'm a survivor.
Pour ces gens-là, ça vaut la peine de se souvenir puis de montrer du respect envers eux.
Le souvenir continue de me propulser, de me motiver et de me convaincre d'accomplir la mission qui m'est assignée.
On a day when Canadians from all walks of life pause and reflect on the supreme sacrifices of so many men and women who fought and died for our freedom, we would like to recognize the contribution of veterans, including those Indigenous veterans who served their country and fellow citizens. From the 1800s to the present-day mission in Afghanistan, Indigenous soldiers have been on the front line in Canada's military. More than 7,000 Indigenous men and women volunteered to serve in the First and Second World Wars, as well as the Korean War, with more than 500 losing their lives in those conflicts. At least 68 medals for bravery were awarded to First Nation soldiers in the First and Second World Wars. In 1943, King George VI bestowed British Empire medals upon the 4 Aboriginal bands, including the Kitkatla Band in BC, for their contributions to the war effort. To this day, many First Nation soldiers lay buried in the battlefields of Europe. Today, Indigenous participation in the armed forces continues with 1,300 of the members. Theirs is a service born of the pride of their ancestors and nation. They are today's role models and tomorrow's leaders. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, commemorating a moment 108 years ago when troops laid down their arms to end the First World War, we join all Canadians in paying tribute to the courage and valor of all who served and those who serve today.
It's not easy to find the final resting spot of one of the most decorated Indigenous soldiers in Canadian history. Francis Pegamagaba the Sniper would have likely wanted it that way. Where there is no doubt is that he would have found this quiet corner of the Wasauksing First Nation near Parry Sound peaceful, free from the horrors of war and politics of a country that all but forgot what he did.
I would say his story may have been sleeping. It was a story that was, told in quiet settings, within his family or from amongst community members.
He was known as Peggy to his fellow soldiers and a terror to the enemy. During some of the most horrific battles of the First World War, Somme, Ypres, Passchendaele, he would sneak into no man's land and wait. His patience led him to being credited with 378 kills and over 300 enemy captured. And after 4 years on the front lines, he was discharged with $898.68 in pay. He was happy to return to the shores of Georgian Bay, but like most Indigenous veterans, he had hoped for a newfound respect. Instead, it was more of the same, poverty and persecution, and the country he fought and bled for still wouldn't grant him citizenship.
They were trying to prove themselves as equals, not to assimilate, but to prove themselves as equals, as Indigenous men, as Indigenous Canadians.
Peggy never did stop fighting, working tirelessly to get more autonomy for band councils. Until he died in 1952, he dedicated his life fighting for Indigenous rights.
Of course, he returned a decorated military hero, but it was that work he did at community levels, at organizational levels, at being a warrior for the rights, for the language, for the culture of his people. Those are the active contributions that I think we most know him for.
In Wissahickon today, the name Francis Peggy is revered in both Ojibwe and English.
He was one of 39 Canadian soldiers awarded the military medal and 2 bars for bravery.
But it took until 2016 before he was immortalized in bronze, strong and defiant, on the shores of Georgian Bay. A hero given his due. Mike Drolek.
The famous poem In Flanders Field that we recite each Remembrance Day was written 100 years ago this year. Canadian Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, the poem's author, was a doctor in the First World War. In May 1915, one of Dr. McCrae's closest friends was killed in the trenches near Ypres, Belgium. He was buried in a humble grave with a simple wooden cross. Wild poppies bloomed between the crosses, marking the many graves. The next day, unable to help his friend or any of the others who had died, Dr. McCrae gave them a voice through his poem. On January 28, 1918, John McCrae passed away. He died not knowing the outcome of the war, but with full understanding of the cost of it. Before he died, Dr. McCrae had the satisfaction of knowing that his poem had been a success. Soon after its publication, it became the most popular poem on the First World War. In part because of the poem's popularity, the poppy became the flower of remembrance. Here's the poem. In Flanders Field, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our places, and in the sky, the lark still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, fell dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved. And now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. To be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field. Please rise as we lay a wreath on behalf of students of Hardy Parker.
I ask you to stand with me for both the injured and the lost. I ask you to keep count with me of all the wars and what they cost. I ask you to be silent with me, quietly grateful for our lot. As I expect, you are as thankful as me For the health and life we've got, I ask that you wish them well with me, all those still risking their all, and I ask you to remember with me the names of those that fall. I expect that you're proud like me of this great nation of ours too, so enjoying all its freedoms like me, support those upholding them for you. I hope that you are hopeful like me, that we will soon bring an end to wars, so you'll have to stand no more with me, and mourning families no different from yours. Till then, be thankful you can stand with me, thinking of those who now cannot. For standing here today with me, at least we show they're not forgot. Please remain standing for the playing of the last post, followed by 2 minutes of silence and the playing of Rose. please remain standing. Thou shalt grow not old, as we are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn, as the going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them. Please remain standing while the choir sings In Flanders Fields. This concludes our Remembrance Day ceremony. Please exit the theater from the back to the front rows.